I think I'm 1 minute early, which is a change. I'm normally either exactly on time or 1 or 2 minutes late or even later. So maybe it's, trying to balance the scales time-wise. Now that I've just started talking, Timmy wants to have his cuddle time. It seems like he knows when I do this, he's going to get as much as half an hour that he can be cradled. Timmy, come. Do you want to jump up? Come boy. I don't want to pick you up. Can you jump up? Come on. As if I ignore him if he jumps up anyway. Stephanie, good to see you here. Graham Stanifith, good to see you. Okay, Timmy, come, I'll pick you up. Come boy. You do realize you might be setting back the recovery of a rib by days or even weeks. Okay. Amy Hall, good to see you here. Stephanie, you should really tell Timmy that be gentle. I was actually going to reach out to you, Stephanie, and ask if you wanted to do Van Gogh tonight, but then I just sort of thought I've written a script for this episode, and right now I'm feeling quite strongly about it. I feel like it's quite an important topic to discuss. And it came about because somebody mentioned it. Someone mentioned in the comments, asked a question, did Gabby's folks know about the Moab incident? Meaning, and I think one's got to clarify the question, did they know about it like that day or the day after or prior to her death? Did they know about the Moab incident? And right in the beginning of this poll, I think it was 80% of you were saying that they didn't know, and now we down to about 55% of you feel that Gabby didn't tell them. So around about half of you feel that Gabby told them, or it doesn't really matter. And then a little bit more than half of you at the moment feel like Gabby didn't tell them. So I know what I think, but I'll give you guys a little bit more of a chance to make up your own minds and also vote. If you haven't voted yet, please do. Sunflowers says, hi from California. My guess is Gabby would have been embarrassed to tell her parents about being pulled over. I think that's well stated. I don't want to make this about me, but when I broke my rib, I didn't tell that many people because I actually was quite embarrassed myself. I thought it was quite a stupid thing to do, and I also didn't even go to the doctor. I kind of wanted to just be private about it, I guess, in a way. Amy says, I have my laptop and iPhone handy for this one. That's good. Good to hear. Pauline Buckle says, good evening, as Alfred Hitchcock would say. Well, it certainly is evening where I am. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. One of the reasons I'm doing these lives is because of the difficulty sleeping, because of the rib that I've broken. My sleeping patterns have kind of been thrown out. So I'm kind of doing this with my nighttime nocturnal hours, all the hours I've got free at night. So it's actually nice being able to socialize with you guys. I don't know why I'm just finding it quite hard editing videos the way that I do. It requires patience. It requires not stamina, but certainly concentration and focus. And it's just easier doing a live, I think, than editing and syncing. So So that's part of the reason why I'm doing this as well. Lisa Barr says she's from Ontario. Good to see you there. Sweet Carolina says hi from Italy, and with a bunch of exclamation marks. Azza says it's 4 p.m. in Vancouver, Canada. How's the weather there? Is it starting to warm up? We've had very rainy weather where I am, so yeah, it's definitely, the rain still hasn't let up. It is starting to get colder here, as you can see. So at the moment, the poll is at 60%. It's gone down to 59%. Did Gabby's folks know about the Moab incident? Most of you are saying no, but almost 40% are saying either yes or does it really matter? So what I think is interesting, I'm going to go into it properly, systematically, but what I do think is interesting is the irony is, we're sort of dealing with a lawsuit that's dealing with a civil suit, dealing with the laundries who remain silent, who should have come forward, who should have, in terms of the lawsuit, who should have communicated, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not arguing to say that they shouldn't have. All I'm saying is the flip side of the coin is, if you look at Gabby herself, did she communicate about the Moab incident when it happened? And even the Moab police, did they release information? In other words, did they, I don't want to say cooperate, did they facilitate the transfer of information in terms of their side? So I'm trying to take that same sort of standard of you should have said something in terms of the laundries and sort of apply it to all of these other actors and characters. And I'm not for a moment saying it's equal. I'm not saying that the onus on the laundries to come forward was the same as the onus on Gabby to say what happened during the Moab incident. I'm not equating it. I'm in a way comparing it. Obviously, you could say the one is there's certain levels of responsibility and what's the word? I guess severity. The implications of it for certain people differ between one another. So also, for example, law enforcement, them not releasing certain things, we're going to get to that. What implications did that have? And so the idea is to kind of have a discussion about, I guess in colloquial terms, we're talking about reaching out. Should you reach out to somebody, right? Should we, as the true crime community, expect people to reach out to one another? And if your answer is yes, then the flip side to that is, are you? Do you reach out? Are you reaching out? And I've kind of been in a situation where, and again, I don't want to make this about me, I'm just using this as an example. I've just suffered an injury, which is probably the second worst injury in terms of seriousness. It's not, I'm not like in horrible pain right now, but certainly was a pretty serious injury. And I've kind of had to say to myself, you should really reach out to other people for support. Support being, I'm a bachelor, I've got to cook my own meals, I do want to get well, I do want to be healthy, but I'm finding I'm a little bit run down. I think some of it is psychology, I'm feeling a little bit beating myself up, trying not to beat myself up, but also feeling kind of run down. And so it helps in a situation like that to reach out, and I have reached out, but it's quite weird that I had to actually sort of say to myself, reach out, right? Reach out for support, kind of thing. And one wonders why hadn't I done it earlier? But if you apply this to Gabby Petito, it's also, did Gabby reach out? If she did, who did she reach out to? So one of the things I didn't mention in my script, I don't think, was if she didn't reach out to her parents, if she didn't tell her parents what was going on, did she tell somebody? And was that somebody Rose, right? And I've got to say at the outset, I don't know what the answers are to these questions. I don't know absolutely what the answers are. Some of what we're saying here is speculating based on what I've found out and what I've researched, but I certainly am not sitting here saying this is the absolute, we know this for a fact. I mean, if you ask the question, did Gabby's folks know about the Moab incident? It would be great if somebody actually asked them that and then they answered it directly. And if that did happen, I've missed it because in preparation for this, I did study 3 or 4 lengthy interviews, one of them over an hour, where they're giving kind of an exclusive interview to Fox News, and then does that even come up? Does that question actually come up, and is it answered? So that's, and if you think about it, had it come up, in other words, had the Moab incident come up, the whole thing could have been avoided. You could have had a situation where Gabby's folks could have said, come home, or communicate more often with me, what is going on. If it gets any worse, come home, or something like that. But do you think that happened? So let's just update ourselves on this poll. At the moment, 58% of you are saying Gabby didn't tell her folks about the Moab incident in August. That's almost 60% of you. That's almost 2/3 of you. Okay. So before I kind of get started on my script, I'm going to be dealing with this question in sort of 4 different layers. I want to share something with you that's got to do with how we think, maybe in a sense how animals think, but this whole idea of expecting total honesty. So it seems like the true crime community have this idea of we should expect total honesty. If it was somehow involved with a suspect, we should expect total honesty from them. They should just come forward and they should be 100% completely honest, right? And we've expected that from Nicole Kessinger. How dare you delete your text? How dare you not say absolutely everything? How dare you withhold something? We've not really had the same expectation from Jeff Libler, but I guess some people would also say, why didn't you come forward? Why did it take the police, this is in the Barry Morphew case, why did it take the police something like 6 months to track you down, right? But it also applies to other cases like Lacey Peterson, Reeva Steenkamp in the Oscar Pistorius case, Rebecca Zahau, even Amanda Knox and Meredith Kircher. Were they communicating, were they reaching out to say, this is exactly what's going on with me, either at the time that things were going on or sort of to law enforcement afterwards, certainly in Amanda Knox's case. So I'm just asking the question, should we expect total honesty from not necessarily the prime suspects in true crime, because I think that's quite a dumb question to ask. I mean, obviously they're going to be covering their tracks, but people that are associated with those people somehow, should we expect total honesty from someone who is having an affair or someone, do you get what I'm saying? And I think the answer is that's really naive. It's really naive to expect total honesty from, for example, Nicole Kessinger. It's naive to expect that. And you might say, well, that's wrong. You should be honest. You're talking to the FBI or you're talking to law enforcement. But then I also want to bring the same thing back to, are you honest? I don't mean honest about, some criminal thing. I just mean, do you tell your parents when things aren't working out in your life? Are you completely forthcoming when things aren't going that great in your life? Would you hand over your phone to your parents and say, look, I just want you to know everything that's going on. These are all the texts that I've sent. I just want you to know absolutely everything. Would you do that? Right? Mel Stiller says, my ex-husband broke 5 ribs, cracked my sternum, and dislocated my right shoulder. I never told anyone about it after it happened. Just that is hectic. But you can kind of understand a thing like that, not telling anyone about it at the time. In a way, it puts you in danger, but in another way, you're trying to contain the situation. Amy Hall says we should, but we won't. Michelle Mybell says self-preservation is what I see a lot. So it doesn't mean they're guilty of a crime. No, self-preservation, absolutely. Sometimes it's not just self-preservation, it's also just kind of a sense of containment and control. You're just maybe you're trying to minimize the drama. Maybe you're trying to just focus on, like you feel like I'm the best person to solve the situation. I'm the best person to know about it and sort it out. And also I've been here before, I can find my way through. What did I write here? So I want to tell you a little story before I get started. It's actually about Ivy, the cat that also lives here sometimes. Earlier today, so it's been raining a lot. The cat has kind of gotten a bit stir crazy, wanting to go out, wanting to explore. And so at one point I opened the door, and I'm a little bit weary of the cat now because the cat has actually caught a swallow. And I'm not really thrilled if the cat catches any birds, but if it's got to catch a bird, a sparrow, I guess, is sort of okay. A dove or a pigeon is sort of okay. To me, the cat catching a swallow is just like the last thing that I really want to happen, especially since the swallows are nesting right outside my door. And so I'm offering them what's supposed to be a safe haven. Meanwhile, and I really don't know how the cat did that. It's kind of a mystery. I don't know if the swallow flew in because there's a glass door there. I don't know if the swallow flew into the glass door or what, but somehow the cat caught the swallow. And so I've kind of been noticing whenever I let the cat out, the cat wants to go directly to a sort of a structure that gives it access to, not complete access to the swallow nest, but gets it very close. And so I don't want the cat there. I don't want the cat sort of hanging around right by the swallow's nest, right? So I'm trying to discourage the cat from doing that. So the thing that was quite interesting today was I let the cat out, the dog as well. They start running around doing their thing. I think my dog is smelling a rat, literally, that is running around the sort of corner area. I think I've messed some birdseed there. It does need to be neatened up. But he seems to be getting really excited, and I think he thinks there's a mouse or a rat at the bottom there. Meanwhile, the cat, anyway, long story short, I've now watched the animals, the dog and the cat, what they're doing outside, and now I'm heading upstairs. and I kind of want to do my own thing, and I'm not going to be, playing lifeguard. I'm not going to be watching what's going to be going on for a couple of minutes, right? Now, the part that I found really interesting is as I walk up the stairs, the cat actually comes from outside inside, and the cat's watching me, but with rapt attention. And so from the stairs, I'm sort of almost out of the side of the stairs. I sort of do that owl thing. I'm sort of going like this to the cat, and the cat's eyes are just on me like this. And then I sort of, I guess, fainted as though I was going to go upstairs, and immediately came downstairs. Guess what happened? The cat immediately went outside and went straight to this part that I didn't want it to go to. So the cat was actually manipulating me and kind of misleading me. It's like, are you out the way? Are you going upstairs? Oh, you are, great. Okay, now I'm going to do what I know you don't want me to do. And so anyway, I went straight to the window, and I hit my hand hard on the window, and the cat jumped off. But basically, the cat knows it's not supposed to be doing that. And even worse than that, the cat's checking to see if I'm checking on the cat, right? So long term, I'm probably going to need to do something, not quite sure what, to discourage the cat from getting up there. Not quite sure what to do. But I just wanted to kind of share that with you, just in the sense of that sort of animalistic thing of manipulating someone, where it's like, I don't want you to know what I'm doing. I want to make sure you don't know what I'm doing, otherwise, because I want to get away with it, right? Ellie, what does Ellie Cat say? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand your question. I just got here, so I'm not sure. Thought Criminal says, plant something beneath it that cats don't like. There is actually something planted underneath it, which actually helps get up there. So anyway, let's go back to the poll. Right now the poll is, did Gabby's folks know about the Moab incident in August? And it's now down to 56%. Ramblin' Rome says, I'm so late, did I miss much? You haven't really missed much at all. Kelly says, it doesn't hurt the cat and they don't associate it with you as punishment. I suppose I could sort of put some kind of fencing in that area, but it's really kind of a tough one. Okay, we've got almost 200 people in chat. I think it's probably time to get going with what I want to talk about. And so I just want to reiterate that I don't know the answer to the question. So the best people to ask would be Gabby's parents, and there's kind of a mystery that, have they been asked? And if someone out there knows for a fact that they've been asked and what the answer was, by all means put a link in the description. But I did spend quite a lot of time researching this, trying to get information on it. And I think the closest information I got was where Nicole Schmidt, that's Gabby's mother, told 60 Minutes Australia in October last year. This is a quote from what she said in that documentary. She said, I wish that she had reached out to me, meaning I wish that Gabby had reached out to me. The way that I read that is that Nicole is sad, is disappointed, is in this position of wishing that her daughter had communicated more to her, and also, what does it mean to say reached out? Contacted her and said, you know what, I'm at the end of my tether. I'm scared. I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm not sure what to do. I'm I'm in a situation that seems to be deteriorating. These are the circumstances I'm in. So I think she means that generally I wish that Gabby had reached out to me, but I think you can apply that as well to the Moab incident. I wish she'd reached out to me. And we haven't completed our analysis of the Moab incident, but there is a moment where Gabby seems to call someone from the inside of the cruiser, and I think some people have assumed that is her parents or her mother or somebody. But then why would Gabby's mother say, I wish that she had reached out to me? The flip side of this conversation is if you say, let's say you accept that Gabby did tell her mother about the Moab incident. The Moab incident happens and Gabby phones home and says, Mom, the police stopped us. And her mother asks, what was that all about? And she says, me and Brian had a huge fight and he locked me out the vehicle and blah, 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 blah. What do you think most mothers would do in that situation? The police, like not just one police officer was involved, but many. I think part of the response could have been that you would then call the police. You would call the Moab police and say, what really happened here? Can you tell me what's going on? You know what I'm saying? In other words, if Nicole knew absolutely about the Moab incident, you can kind of imagine steps being taken, right? And so, yeah, exactly. Connie says, come home now. I mean, that would have been the obvious one. It's not just Brian and I had an argument. It is, so you can imagine your mother saying, how did the police know about this? And the answer is, well, a passerby was so shocked by our argument, was so shocked by what he saw, was so, horrified in a way by what he was witnessing that he actually called the police. That doesn't happen every day. And then the police arrive and, what you actually see on the body cam isn't mild. It's not like Gabby's just sitting there and it's like, this is one big overreaction. Gabby's almost tearful throughout the whole thing. Gabby's almost like emotional and in tears and traumatized and sort of anxious the entire time. Goes on for almost an hour, whereas Brian goes from somewhat cautious in the beginning to increasingly gleeful and seemingly relieved, right? But the point is, if Gabby had reached out to her mother would very likely have said, you know what, that is it. I'm not sending you any more money. You guys come home right now. It's not working out. Blah, 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 blah. Now, the other side of that argument is I don't think that Gabby didn't tell her mother anything. Her mother seemed to know in a broad way, in a general way, that that tensions were escalating, right? And so Gabby was, I think, telling her mother some of what was going on, but filtering it to an extent that was, to some extent, being honest with her mother, but also making sure that the door remained open so that she could continue on her journey. Bear in mind, a lot had gone into this. A lot had gone into setting up the van life journey. The other thing is also, just like in the Shanann Watts scenario, how do you explain to all your followers, okay, so it's game over, we're packing up, we're going home, the whole, in this case, it's not thriving, but this whole van life adventure has abruptly ended, the end. How do you explain that to your followers? And can you be truthful about that? Me and Brian were stopped by the cops. We were arguing, slapping each other. Somebody called the cops, so we're going to go home. The van life thing isn't all that it's cracked up to be the end. Do you really think that they're going to do that? And that kind of raises this question. I think I wrote it down here. Do you think that, remember, social media is quite new. There was a time where there was no internet whatsoever. Social media is kind of quite new. Do you think that the advent of social media is that it programs us more and more and more, and some of us also more than others, but that social media programs us to be somewhat manipulative in general? When I say manipulative, I mean we're selective in what we reveal online, we curate what we reveal, we minimize certain things, we emphasize other things, we try and distort things in a way to make it look like we want it to look. Because let's face it, a fairy tale is always attractive. Anything that adds up to, wow, look how beautiful that is, look how beautiful you are, look how beautiful that situation is, that's attractive. And people people are interested in that. It resonates with their own fairy tales. It's something that you can make money out of. Whereas if you're saying, well, guys, guess what? I'm having a nightmare. This isn't working out. It's so traumatic. It's all been one big mess. That tends to repel people. It tends to remind people of their own misery, and people don't really want to be reminded of that, right? It's not inspiring. What's the opposite of inspiring? Is it depressing, right? And so, but what I'm trying to say is social media, the time we invest in it, the time we consume it, is that teaching us, is that programming us to become more manipulative, shallower people, and I guess also less honest? Are we also less honest people? Are we having less practice having genuine relationships with people because so many are these superficial interactions on social media? It's just a question. The other side to that is and sorry if I sound self-indulgent, but I've just had a serious bicycle crash, and part of me wonders, have you lost your touch in terms of, you indoors a lot, you wrote over 100 books over 7-8 years. Has that turned you into a bit of a sort of indoor creature, and you just don't know how to ride a bicycle anymore? Because the fact is, I've got a background as a triathlete. I rode a bike to school every day. My technical skills on a bicycle weren't that bad. Even on any given Sunday, if I descend, I tend to descend faster than most people. I tend to be, I don't know if it's more reckless, but certainly more confident, I guess is the word. And then suddenly you fall, and suddenly that sense of, so in other words, have I also lost my connection to real things like riding a bicycle over real terrain? Because you spend quite a lot of time in front of a screen. You spend quite a lot of time discussing reality, but you're not actually in reality, right? Let's just look at some of your comments. Someone said humbleness is necessary. A friend of mine did the Ironman today, and I told him to stay humble. It definitely is necessary, just kind of in general. Stephanie says, I think many of us can relate to that. Unfortunately, this friend of mine who did the Ironman, they cancelled the swim because of really stormy conditions. So I don't know how he feels about it, but I'd be pretty disappointed because if he didn't do the swim, it's technically not an Ironman. He technically did 2/3 of the Ironman. So you can't really call yourself an Ironman. So I wonder whether he's going to try and do it again. It's a heck of a lot of effort going into that. Lisa says, when I saw the video of Gabby and Brian, I could tell she was shaken up and Brian was so happy. Jen H says, no, Nick, I think it was purely an accident. I'm sure you're still athletically inclined. I think I have lost some of my, what's the word? Your natural balance and whatever. I think I definitely have, but I don't think it's like you can't get it back. Kelly says DV is often embarrassing to people. They fear people will look at them for not leaving. Okay, so just going back to the poll, did Gabby's folks know about the Moab incident in August? 58% of you say that they didn't. 21%, which is quite a large number, 21%, around a fifth of you think that Gabby did tell them. And as I say, you must bear in mind, if Gabby did tell them, shouldn't they have responded in a certain way? Mom, the police pulled us over. Brian was speeding. Brian wouldn't let me into the truck or into the van. The police separated us. Oh, okay, well, just carry on your trip. Enjoy. Do you think that happened? So anyway, the bottom line is Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, did say, I wish that she'd reached out to me. And bear in mind, this whole adventure, the point of the adventure is almost two young people showing the world, showing themselves, showing one another that they are living their lives, that they don't need mommy and daddy's help, that they are living their best lives, that they are independent, that they are free, that they are away from the shadow of parental control and influence. The whole idea is to break away and to become who they are. That's kind of part of why you're doing it. You don't want to be living at home with your parents. You don't want to be, and bear in mind the pandemic kind of created this situation that prolonged the cheek bite jowlness of young folks that were sort of forced to stay with their parents either because they lost their jobs or because they couldn't get jobs or because jobs were taken away, for example, restaurant jobs and all that kind of thing. So it was like, I want to live my life, but I'm stuck with my parents because of the pandemic. And then you make this decision, I'm going to go out into the wild, wild west and I'm going to be free and I'm going to live the life that I have in mind, only to find that things aren't really working out. But now do you then sort of phone home and say, save me, I made a mistake, save me, or do you try and figure your way out of like not a really great situation? You're not in a great situation, but you've kind of signed up for it, and you've also told everyone the same thing. Everyone's admiring you on social media. Everyone's admiring you on Instagram. Do you say, I give up. I give up. Mom, please pick me up at the airport kind of thing. And then that's the end of the story, right? So you've got to bear in mind, with everybody watching, it also makes it difficult to do that kind of thing. So as I say, where Nicole Schmidt told 60 Minutes, I wish that she'd reached out to me, this suggests that Gabby didn't reach out to any of her family members. I'm talking about saying, hi, we were just apprehended by the police, and Brian and I actually had a really serious argument, and I told the police this and Brian told the police that, and I've got a bit of an injury on my face and this and that and the next thing. In that sense, I don't think Gabby did reach out to any of her family members. As Connie said, had she done so, the message would have been quite clear: come home now. Nicole's response to this whole question of I wish she'd reached out to me was also in the context of watching the body cam of the Moab incident. It wasn't that she'd gotten a call, to my knowledge. It wasn't that she'd gotten a call during the situation. Mom, we're at the side of the road. Brian's talking to the police. I wish you'd reached out to me. Well, that would have been reaching out. So I kind of get the idea that Nicole's response was in the context of watching the body cam of the Moab incident just like everybody else did. That was how she kind of became aware of it. So I don't think she had prior knowledge of it, just based on Nicole's own statement. Saying, I wish that she'd reached out to me sounds like she's saying, I didn't have prior knowledge of it. And I could be wrong. If you asked her the question directly, she may have said, she did mention it fleetingly, but it was just like, she said that, Brian was speeding and I didn't think very much of it, right? The full quote from Nicole Schmidt in context is, she said the following: it's just hard to watch. I wanted to jump through the screen and rescue her. I saw a young girl that needed someone to just hug her and keep her safe. I just felt so bad for her. I wish that she had reached out to me. And the critical words here are that I wanted to jump through the screen and rescue her. What do you think that would have meant? Jumping through the screen and rescuing her would have been, Gabby, this is horrible what's happening to you. Come, I'm going to take you home. Do you think Gabby wanted that? Do you think Gabby at that point wanted to be rescued? And that is the part that is kind of quite tragic and quite troubling and quite difficult to deal with, is although all of us looking at that footage want to rescue Gabby, Gabby herself didn't want to be rescued. Gabby didn't think she needed to be rescued. Does that make sense? So let me just say that again. Although what we are seeing and what her mother is seeing is, I want to rescue you, I want to help you. And I think even the law enforcement folks felt that in a general sense. Like, how can we help you? How can we sort out this situation? We can see you distressed. We can see you upset. How can we help? Gabby herself kind of didn't want to be rescued. That's kind of why she didn't really blame Brian. She didn't make Brian's... there's a point where the officer asks something like, he kind of insists, he said, but did Brian hit you? But did Brian hit you? And then she says, I guess, which suggests that he did. But what Gabby's trying to do is not, she's trying to make a situation where this is not a big deal, let us go and we'll live happily ever after. And the police are kind of trying to decide, is this a big deal? Is this something that we should let go? And what do you do when the victim is basically saying it's not a big deal? It's a difficult situation. It really is a difficult situation. Sageti Nona says, how long since you left with your baby? I was hoping you are doing well. Mel Stiller says it's more like the Tin Man. Snowline says, hello, good to see you here. Sweet Bee says, if she had told them, wouldn't have Gabby's mom told law enforcement immediately, and would it have been made public? I don't know if that's really an issue. I don't really think, it wouldn't, I don't know if it really would have been made public. There are a lot of incidents happening all the time, and not all of them gain all of that traction. I don't know if that was really the concern. Timmy, can I let you go down easily there? There we go. Okay. Kevin says when she would have met up was just around the time she died, I think. I think you're talking about Rose. When she would have met up with Rose was just around the time she died. Natasha says, in my eyes, her parents would have protected her. Okay. So I do think, in general, if you want to be honest about this question, it's a very difficult question to interrogate properly or completely, because it seems like we're trying to blame either Gabby or her parents for a situation. So, when you ask the question, did Gabby tell her parents about the Moab incident? If you sort of go fully into that question, like you unbuckle your seatbelt and you really like just fully go into that question, it feels like, are you trying to blame Gabby or are you trying to blame her parents? Or are you trying to shift responsibility away from Brian for what happened to her? That's not actually what we're doing here. It's kind of how the question came up was somebody asked the question and I kind of thought for a moment, I actually don't know the answer. But I also thought it's a really good question, and why is there kind of uncertainty about the answer? And so I sort of asked some people what they knew, and then I went and I investigated it. And I went through quite a lot of footage where the parents are spoken to, and I was quite surprised how that particular question doesn't really come up. And because it's quite fundamental. Did Gabby tell you about the Moab incident? And then, 2 weeks later, she's murdered. There's definitely a link between the two. And so if you knew about the Moab incident, did you take any steps? If you didn't know about the Moab incident, why didn't you know? Right? And so in a weird way, we actually just simply reinvestigating the Petito case, kind of going, what really happened here? And why were certain people not informed of certain things when it, would it have been such a big deal not to? And I think you kind of get a better sense of who Gabby was and what a big deal it was being kind of unofficially engaged and trying to live this van life adventure, but also trying to live it online. And the pressures that they were under, it means when things don't go well, you've got to take all of that on the chin. You've got to deal with it sort of privately. So we're not trying to shift responsibility by asking this question. We're not trying to blame Gabby or her parents. We simply want to know, did Gabby's parents know about the Moab incident? Did Gabby pick up her phone? Did she call home? And did she tell her mother what was going on? And so if we're brave enough to go down that rabbit hole, and it is a rabbit hole, we're almost 6 months after the fact. I do think we should. I think we should go down that rabbit hole. But when we do, we're going to be confronted by some disturbing realities. And that's okay. It's okay to say, this is a little bit unsettling. This is a little bit of a troubling thing to think about. And it is, and it should be, because this story didn't end happily ever after. This story ended tragically. One of the reasons it ended tragically was because of lack of knowledge about what was really going on, right? Because of this alternate reality that was sort of the impression of their van life journey. So I'm going to separate what I'm going to go into now into 4 different areas. And the first one is to say that I don't think Gabby was completely honest with her folks, right? I don't think Gabby was completely honest with her folks. And how many teenagers how many young folks are like completely honest about everything that's going on? Even Shanann Watts, when she was in the midst of her husband saying that, he didn't want the baby, right? This is in North Carolina. And not only that, that he wanted to leave her, that he was like, I think we're incompatible and whatever. She didn't actually confide in her family about that. Her family were under the impression she was feeling sick regarding the pregnancy. And there was some truth in that as well, because, it's just kind of a separate thing. Chris Watts had given her oxy, so she was feeling really poorly. But they were under the impression all of that was because she wasn't really feeling very well. But anyway, the bottom line is Shanann didn't even tell close family members exactly what was going on with her. Instead, she kind of told other friends. She told friends, right? Another example of this is Suzanne Morphew. Did she sort of reach out and did she tell everybody what was going on? Because some serious things were going on with her. Did she tell her father? Did she say, Dad, I want you to know how I'm being treated? She didn't tell her father. Did she tell her siblings? Did she tell her daughters? And I think the question is, what did she tell? And the answer is, she seemed to confide maybe in one friend, maybe in one or two friends. But the answer is that it does seem quite common, not only in true crime, but just in reality in general, that some of these uncomfortable realities we do keep close to our chests, and that can be quite risky. Can be quite risky to do that. So let me go through this. We're now dealing with Gabby not being completely honest with her folks. And as I say, if it seems unfair to be accusing Gabby of dishonesty, let's face it, Brian, during the Moab incident, he wasn't honest either. And it's not on the same level. Brian was clearly dishonest. He misled officers to believe he didn't have a phone. And it's kind of far more contrived and kind of ugly. Whereas what Gabby did was she kind of helped Brian out. She kind of that's my impression, she kind of gave Brian a break by saying, she didn't say, you know what, Brian hit me. She said, when they sort of pushed her, she said, I guess. She's trying to let him off the hook, but she's also trying to let both of them off the hook. So, Brian misled officers to believe he didn't have a phone. He denied hitting Gabby, and he seemed relieved and even gleeful when things went his way. I also think it's a reasonable question to ask whether Brian told his parents about the Moab incident. So let's do a quick poll on that. Do you think Brian told his parents about the Moab incident? And I guess we've got to have a timeline. I guess you've got to say, did he tell his parents sort of at the time? Did he tell his parents, let's say, between the time that it happened and before he came back from the van, right? Right? So that's the question. Did Brian tell his parents about the Moab incident? And the timeline for that question is between, was it August 12th? Between August 12th, is it August 12th or August 13th? Between August 12th and around August 27th, did he tell his folks about that? So let's see what you guys say. Janet says no. Rebecca says no. By the way, we've got a new member here, Luna Star. Welcome. Brianna says, I have no idea about Brian. That's not a bad point. Corporal Deb, thanks a lot. Corporal Deb says, Gabby knew the national sign for that. I think she was very afraid and thought things would get better after the Moab thing. I've heard about that national sign thing. I know some people think that is That's a definite thing. Corindale says no. Jen H says no. Doggy Daycare says no. Connie says if he did tell them, I think he probably blamed Gabby. As this is something similar to that. Sharon Butler says, I don't know. P. Willie says definitely no. Jody says no. So consider the following. The fact is, Gabby was away from home until, Gabby was separated from her parents and away from home through the entire summer epic, right? She never came home. She never saw her parents again. She died during the summer epic. She died in the Grand Tetons in the sort of Wyoming area, right? That's not the same story with Brian. Brian actually went home. Brian flew back to Florida, and I think he was home for something like a week or 10 days. And so Brian, it's different. You might say, well, Gabby could easily have just texted or whatever, but Brian's now literally with his family, is back home, and aren't his family going to be saying how things going, right? And we don't know Brian very well. I mean, don't even know the Laundries very well because we haven't really gotten much out of them. So we don't really know how familiar they were with one another, but one does kind of get a sense that the Laundries were quite protective over their son and that he sought their protection to some extent as well, given what he did after he left Wyoming. So, and I'm speculating, I'm simply saying, so if you ask the question, did Brian tell his parents? You could also have the scenario where he did tell his parents, and not only did he tell his parents, he said something along the lines of, the police separated her from my protection, which was essentially true. In other words, the police stopped us. The police were concerned about injuries that I had. The police blamed Gabby, blah, 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 blah. And so here's a situation where Brian technically was the victim, and Brian may have said that. He may have said, Gabby did this to me, and then sketched himself kind of as the victim, and his parents then already may have felt, wow, the actual victim in this story is our son, not Gabby, right? And if Brian had told the story, all I'm saying is this is as a scenario. If Brian was able to convince the cops that things were a certain way, could he not have convinced his own loved ones that things were a certain way as well? That Gabby was sort of almost coercing him, that he was being drawn into something that he didn't want to do. For example, the social media. He wanted to go on the van life journey, wanted to have this adventure with her, but he didn't want to be a prop in her social media thing. It's almost like the Chris Watts case all over again. Or he didn't say anything about it, or he said, I don't want to talk about it. That's just one of the mysteries of the Gabby Petito case, which feels frustrating that we just don't know a simple thing like that. So it is quite an interesting question both ways. Did Gabby tell her parents? Did Brian tell his parents? And I wonder whether the answer isn't that both of them didn't really tell their parents, because both of them, bear in mind that the journey did continue. So regardless of the Moab incident, both of them for a short time continued on the summer epic. And wasn't that because they wanted to? And if they wanted to, bear in mind, Brian could also have totally thrown Gabby under the bus and said, Gabby totally punched me in the face and it was really violent and, blah, 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 blah. Brian was also sort of saying, I don't want to press charges and so on. Brian also wanted the summer epic to continue, right? So just based on that, it does seem like both Brian and Gabby probably didn't tell their parents, or whatever they did say was a kind of vanilla version, a minimized version that would not have them recalled, like come home kind of thing. Do you guys agree with that? Lisa says Brian manipulated the police. Dana says, bottom line, Brian was manipulative and controlling. Corporal Deb says, did the notebook have anything to help the police? Probably, but we also don't know. We don't know what is in the notebook. I wouldn't be surprised if the notebook contained a manifesto. Brian seemed the kind of dude who would write a manifesto, and I wouldn't be surprised if that contained a manifesto. I really wouldn't be surprised. Brian invested a lot into the notebook. He even took photos of, I think, the contents of the notebook that went onto Instagram. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is something in that notebook. Okay, so the other reason why Gabby, I think, wouldn't have confided in her parents specifically about the Moab incident was because she was to some extent dependent on them for financing her trip. Bear in mind, on the 17th, was it the 17th or the 21st? I think she went into the hotel. It's been some time, so I'm a little bit fuzzy, but I think they checked into the hotel in Salt Lake City on the 17th. That was the same day Brian flew to Florida. I think it was about 4 days later. I could be wrong, but around about the 21st, her dad ordered like an Uber meal for her. Do you think that would have happened if it was like, the police have been called, we're arguing, I'm crying all the time. Okay, well, I'm going to order you food so that you can continue your journey. It would be like, I'm going to book you a plane ticket, or I'm going to come and fetch you, or you are coming home immediately. In other words, the fact that she was dependent on them meant she couldn't tell them something without there possibly being a string being pulled. In other words, if I tell you this, you might do that. So, I want this thing to continue, but if I tell you this, you might not want it to continue. And they would have been right. So because she was dependent on them financially, and we know they were, we know because Brian stole money out of her account, they didn't have money. We know that was also disclosed quite a few times on Instagram when they said they're downscaling their lives, they're using Airbnb less, they're eating at restaurants less, but nevertheless the expenses were still high. The expenses were also high because when you live the van life journey, it's not like you don't spend anything sitting in your van. You often are driving, so every day is an expense. So your expenses are constant, or where you're getting your income from. And they did have a certain pool of money based on some of the things they'd sold, but they certainly hadn't come close to monetizing their social media. They weren't close to making it as influencers at that point. So because of that, they were heavily dependent on handouts from mom and dad. And as a result of that, they were probably very, very careful what they were going to say about how unpleasant the trip was being. So in other words, full disclosure probably would have and should have ended the journey. So just in short, Mom, this is exactly what happened at Moab today. Okay, great, come home right now, right? And that's the end of your summer epic. That's the end of your honeymoon in a way as well. And so I think what was difficult was to separate the journey and the career and the fairy tale from this relationship that was actually unraveling. It was actually tangled together. It wasn't just, I want to go to Seattle. I want to go to the salt flats, the Bonneville salt flats. I want to see this, I want to see that. It is, I've got to do that with this person who is feeling increasingly insecure and unhappy and is becoming more controlling. And both of us are finding the reality of all these discomforts: dirty feet, smelly feet, flies. We hot, but we don't want to drink bottled water. All these little things, more and more aggravating, right? Dana says her parents would want her things. Hey Jealousy says Gabby sold her blue jeans for money. That's true. She sold quite a few clothing items and sort of designs as well. Christo Cedar says she had her own money. Early signs are a major red flag. Young adults using own judgment. I think she had her own money, but I don't think it was like, what's the word? Like a fount of, not the fountain of youth, but a sort of fountain of cash that was going to cover everything. I don't, I think there was sort of a sense already at Moab that don't you remember Brian saying he didn't want to stay at a hotel because they couldn't afford it, because they didn't actually have money then already. It's also difficult to know what the reality is of the Mary Piglets incident. Was that an argument actually over money? Did Gabby feel she was overcharged or double charged? But was that ultimately an argument over money? Was Gabby surprised about the size of the bill? Was one of them surprised about the bill? I kind of have the impression Gabby paid for that, and maybe Gabby was also getting tired of paying for some of these bills, right? Kathy says, hi from Minnesota, speedy recovery. Thanks a lot for that. So sorry for your pain. Well, sitting here, although I've got a rib, I'm almost sorry I saw that picture. Although the rib is like totally, it's like snapped and underneath itself, I'm not really sitting here with really any pain, which is kind of unbelievable. I've got to tell you, getting into the bath, I mean, the point of having a bath is that you relax and that your muscles relax and that you feel soothed and whatever. That's actually one of the most painful things. Getting in, like you try and get in the bath and everything tenses up and there's all that pressure to lower yourself down. That's the most painful part. And then you actually lie in the bath and that rib is actually sort of digging into you because it's like, wow, you moved me. So that's quite frustrating. I am able to sleep better now, including on my back. So that's also quite surprising. It is displaced. Kelly says, Nick, you are high maintenance. You are wanting to be able to breathe and work at the same time. Well, I have started narrating my audiobooks again. I've just decided to do shorter sections. So instead of just forcing myself to do really long chapters. P. Willie says the Bonneville salt flats were only 100 miles from the Salt Lake City airport hotel room. Why didn't she venture out there on her own? Was she codependent that she didn't dare drive the van or take an Uber? It could have been that she was codependent. It could have been. And that's quite a sort of weird situation when you're codependent. Like, if you think about Gabby being, I don't know, I thought she was a lot more attractive than Brian, just seemed more balanced, more, I don't know what the word is, but just seemed like a nicer person. And yet, for some other reason, she was quite insecure and fearful. And so, in some ways, someone like that can advance compared to their partner. So, in other words, you advance because you have better social traction. People find you attractive on social media, and people like you, and you're likable. But you can't quite continue that process of individualization because you're codependent, because for some reason you're insecure. I'm not quite sure what that was about. I don't know. I don't know whether the pandemic or their own sort of OCD things led them to be anxious about things. It's difficult to say. I also think that a narrative that is missing from the story is possibly using recreational substances. And I don't mean it in a severe way. I'm not saying they were drug addicts or that they were using really severe drugs, but just the habitual use of certain drugs may cause you to not only lose touch with reality, but you don't always know how to deal with reality in the absence of those substances sometimes. And so I just wonder, because it does come up in their social media. I don't really want to talk about that though in this. So as I say, full disclosure probably would have and should have ended the journey. And so what I think we saw was the manipulation of curated social media leaking over into real relationships where a veneer is put on that dynamic as well. So in other words, what you're saying about your reality on social media is slanted, it's twisted, it's colored, it's manipulated, right? And you're so used to doing that as a matter of course that you start doing that with your real relationships as well. You start communicating in a way that's not completely authentic because you're so used to doing it generally, right? We do know that Gabby confided in Nicole regularly, every 2 or 3 days, and that Nicole was at least aware that tensions were escalating. What that means exactly is unclear, but what Nicole probably understood from this was that the bickering was at a normal level. It may have sort of escalated, but it was nevertheless normal. Mom, we're arguing more. But Nicole must have assumed, well, yeah, they're just arguing more, but life in a van isn't going to be a bed of roses every day. Ironically, those are the exact same words that Reva Steenkamp, I think, said to her mother or her cousin. Just that we're arguing a lot, and then didn't go into detail about that. And so you kind of have, again, that sense of, if only you'd said more, your life could actually have been saved. If only you'd sort of taken 5 minutes and just said, you know what, this is exactly what's going on with me. Someone may have said, you need to get out. You are in a dangerous situation. Do you see that kind of thing? So as I say, I think Nicole probably understood that the arguing was kind of at a normal level. She was aware that there were tensions, but probably thought it was normal. And I think to some extent, even the Moab cops thought the same thing, that, okay, this couple are bickering. Somebody did call 911, but it's actually just a little bit of slapping around. It's really not a big deal. It's at a normal level. Well, it wasn't. It's certainly not a level where several police officers had to intercept them and ultimately separate them. It wasn't a normal level. And I think Rose sort of gives us some insight into, was it a normal relationship ever? Wasn't it quite a toxic relationship where they were always arguing? There was a lot of drama, but they always seemed to get back together. And in a situation like that where you're always arguing and you always get back together, at what point do you realize this isn't healthy if you're always doing it? It's kind of become normalized. At what point does somebody else watching, looking in, go, I think they've passed the point of no return? So the bottom line here is, a passerby was so alarmed by what he saw that he called 911. So it doesn't matter what the Moab cops thought, doesn't really matter what Gabby's folks thought, it doesn't even really matter what Gabby thought or what Brian thought. A complete stranger, a completely neutral third party witnessed what was going on, and he was so alarmed that he called 911. And there was also someone else who also saw something. We also saw, so beyond what this third person saw, you might say, okay, this guy is really sensitive, he should never have called 911. I don't think many of you would agree with that. I think he should have called 911. But besides that, we saw ourselves that Gabby was really emotional and in a lot of distress virtually throughout all the body cam footage. It wasn't like the 911 call was like crying wolf. It wasn't like, no, you should never call 911. You could kind of say, no, this intervention was necessary. It is necessary that the police talk to both of these people. It is necessary that the police say, what exactly is going on here? And if it's necessary that the police know from a third-party perspective, think about it from the perspective of Gabby. Gabby, shouldn't you have called your mom and told her what happened? There's also probably the tendency that was taking place where, and again, I don't know this for a fact, but I seem to remember someone saying that Gabby's father had sort of referred to Brian as Brianna and sort of belittled him, I guess it was sort of putting him in his place. But how do you think Brian felt about that? And Gabby probably was in the habit of sort of sticking up for Brian and not protecting Brian, but sort of making Brian feel more secure, given that was taking place. And so because she was in a pattern of doing that, of helping Brian with his ego, whatever it was, you can imagine in this situation, she would have done just the same thing. She was defaulting to that same psychology. But the point is, when we saw Gabby there, she was, even though she was doing that, she was protecting Brian, she was nevertheless really emotional. She was in a lot of distress, and not just, she wasn't like crying for 5 minutes and then she was completely normal and smiling. She was like traumatized. She was in distress virtually throughout the body cam footage. And it's difficult to say how much of that was she feared that her dream was going to be taken away from her. She feared that it was going to be the end of the summer epic. If only she'd been able to see, well, you've still got your whole life ahead of you beyond that. Not that if you allow the summer epic to run its course, that's going to be your life. But I think the part that's difficult to see is, was she in distress because she's worried that the summer epic was going to be jeopardized, or was she emotional because of what had just happened, or both? And so that is why we kind of deal with these Moab incident deep dives, is to kind of get the sense of what was Gabby really thinking about what was going on. because I do think there was a strong sense of, I don't want this to end. I'm not happy with what happened today, but can we please continue? We also know that both Gabby and Brian had wounds to their faces and arms. Both of them were wounded. And yet Gabby elected to be discreet about the situation and the circumstances she found herself in. This discretion obviously enabled Brian. This is quite an important point. Gabby being discreet about what Brian had done enabled Brian, right? Now we come to the second point. Gabby's folks haven't been completely clear either. And I could be wrong here. Maybe they were explicit in an interview I haven't seen, but so far I can't remember them being asked, did Gabby call you during the Moab incident or just after? And what did you think and what did you say and what did you do? Maybe that was asked, maybe that was addressed and I just missed it. But my understanding is this hasn't really come up. Corporal Deb says, do we really know how she felt about marriage to Brian? Was there an underlying problem right from the start? I think the fact that Gabby referred to Brian as a fiancé and vice versa during the Moab incident, I think that shows where she was at that point in time. So I think she thought of him as her fiancé at that point. As my understanding is the problem was, and I could be wrong, but my understanding was the problem was a parent objected to them getting married so soon, so young, right? And that also would have made Brian feel controlled, insecure, resentful, whatever, right? And kind of impinged in a way. That's also something where Gabby's parents haven't been completely clear. How did you feel about them getting married? They haven't really wanted to talk too much about that. So anyway, while researching this question, whether Gabby's parents knew about the Moab incident, I trawled through various lengthy interviews the Petitos gave to several news outlets. In early October, the Petitos went on to Dr. Phil. I think that was the first major sort of tell-all. And I'm just not sure the Moab incident really came up there in a meaningful way. It may have come up, but not in a way that was really addressing the question that we're asking, to my knowledge. In mid-October, for example, all four of Gabby's parents and step-parents participated in an over hour-long interview with Fox News. Sort of had her mother and stepfather sort of sitting in front, kind of on lowish chairs, and then her biological father and stepmom sort of on higher chairs behind them. And that's the sort of title image to this particular episode. And so it's an hour-long interview. Aren't you going to talk about the Moab incident at some point, talking to them for an hour? And so, as I say, I may have missed it, but for me it was astonishing that the Moab incident didn't really come up there either. And what I mean is, in the sense that we're talking about, where you asked the question, did Gabby tell her folks about the Moab incident like around about the time that it happened? In other words, did they find out about the Moab incident from Gabby, by Gabby sort of phoning them and saying, this happened? Or did they find out the way we all found out, by when it was released on, the body cam was released to everybody, right? And that just didn't seem to be addressed in a very clear way. As I said, I might be missing something. If I am, just point me in the right direction. I just found it astonishing if it didn't really come up. At that point, the Moab law enforcement had already released the first body cam footage. It had been out almost a month already. So it's not like the news folk didn't know about it. So why not ask about it? And maybe the reason was because it would have looked like or felt like victim blaming at that point. I would have understood that, but I guess you could just say, did Gabby reach out to you? And then, why do you think she didn't? I guess that would be quite an uncomfortable thing to discuss on camera. Maybe they asked that it not be, I don't know. It was interesting that when it was brought up, so it did come up in the discussion. Gabby's father actually described the footage as too painful to watch, and he said he hadn't watched it. And I wonder whether that's changed since then. I wonder whether he's watched it since then. Because bear in mind, this is the last footage of his daughter. I don't know whether it's fair to make this comparison, but I lost a really good friend of mine in October, and I must, after falling myself, I really would have liked his counsel on what to do and how to feel and get motivation and so on. I actually spoke to his wife after I fell, and she said she actually told me that. Not, I think not that long before he died, he fell during a training session or something, and he was actually sitting beside his bicycle crying, and that disclosure just kind of gave me a sense of what's the word? I don't know, just that we all human, we all frail, we all have setbacks, we all make mistakes. Life is kind of tough at various stages for all of us. Sometimes we are all overwhelmed, no matter how strong we are. And so anyway, in terms of Gabby's father, I wonder whether he has watched it yet. But in terms of this friend Alex, I sort of feel like I still want to hear his voice. I want to see pictures of him. I want to know actually what happened to him as well. As painful as the end of his life was, I would like to know what happened to him. But maybe that's because I'm like a true crime animal and not everyone is. And, it might be different with a blood relative. It might be different when it's your daughter. Do you want that kind of in your mind? You can imagine it can be very, very, very painful. But anyway, so that was his reaction, was that he said he hadn't watched it. In November, the Petitos appeared on Dr. Oz, and the Moab incident was barely mentioned there as well. So I kind of just find it incredible that you have 3 or 4 opportunities where you have these major interviews, and that question kind of isn't addressed. And is that because it was asked not to be addressed? Is it because of sensitivity, or is it just not, so they didn't get to it? Stephanie says, is the trial this month for your friend? It is this month. I actually need to find out when exactly it is. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's this coming week, and then I've got to decide whether I'm going to go down, whether I've said I'm going to go down. Do I want to go down given how things are with me, so I don't know. I'm going to have to deal with that. I'm going to have to get certainty about that. I do hope it's going to be late, at least a week later in the month, but to be honest, I've got an idea. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like next week, Wednesday or something. And to be honest, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't really know what I'm going to do. The other part that's a problem is I'm awake now at night. So how do you attend trial in the day? It sounds like a stupid thing, but it's nevertheless relevant. So I don't know. We'll see. Okay. So although I think the onus was on Gabby to communicate with at least one of her parents about the Moab incident, it's also clear that through her communication with her parents, it wasn't intuited that something deeper was wrong. So Gabby was communicating with her parents anyway. And I don't know whether, it might be, I might be assuming something that's not true, but one kind of gets the idea that there wasn't a sense of intuition that, is something wrong. You sound a little bit, you sound down, you sound a bit disappointed, is something bothering you? Maybe that did come up, and maybe Gabby deflected that or dodged that by saying, no, I'm just tired, whatever. But it certainly wasn't intuited to the point where it's like, I'm not going to let this go. I know something's bothering you. What is it? I don't know whether Gabby would have cried over the phone. One would just like to know. Wasn't there a sense that something was troubling Gabby that she didn't really want to talk about? In any event, in this area, as I say, we've got an intertextuality with the Watts case where Shanann didn't really tell her family what she was arguing about or why they were arguing in the 2 weeks prior to her murder. It's also a similar time frame, 2 weeks. And of course, Shanann was also putting up curated posts of happiness and wellness on her social media. That was her focus. I'm going to, while this real stuff is happening to me, I'm going to think about how I can show how great things are. Right? That's my focus. I'm going to do this gender reveal. And so it's almost like moving into an alternate reality from reality. It's like, because that's what social media kind of is. It's like, this is my reality. This is what I'm dealing with. But what am I going to say on social media? What am I going to do on social media? And that's not reality. That is, how am I going to curate my alternate reality, and I'm going to make that my focus, right? And meanwhile, the true dynamic of what's going on is quite different, and it's getting worse, and it's getting aggravated, and it's not being resolved. And so I want you to think about this in terms of your lives as well. To what extent are you jumping out of your real lives into social media, whether it's social media entertainment, social media interactions, social media, whatever, when you should be at least quite hands-on about something specific? And is something specific getting worse and worse? And are you running away from it or escaping it in social media, right? Remember, reality is reality. Social media is not reality. You might prefer the alternate reality of social media, but it's not really the real world. So, it's something you can do something about, and you need to do something about. Anyway, this may be a symptom then of people tending to be more secretive, even to those closest to them, of things going south on them in order for the show to go on. In other words, if you're on social media a heck of a lot, I'm speaking specifically about creators and influencers, the more you are on social media, doesn't that mean you're going to tend to be more secretive, even to those closest to you? And when things go badly, well, the most important thing is that the show must just go on. I spoke to a friend of mine recently. I haven't spoken to him for quite a long time. And he told me that, I'm just repeating what he said. He said there was a very successful German influencer who crossed paths with him. And she's apparently a really good tennis player. And I think she is an ambassador for some really big brands. I think it's like Adidas and whatever. And apparently they played a tennis match, and he said during every single sort of break, every single, between games and between sets and whatnot, she would have some sort of social media moment where she would, I guess, update her fans on whatever. I don't know, take a photo of whatever she was drinking or take a photo of herself or whatever. And he just said he was astonished at the level that she was kind of actually a slave to her audience and her fans, and just how dysfunctional it actually was from the perspective of sport, from the perspective of someone, you're playing a tennis match, and meanwhile, when you should be recovering from the games and the sets and whatever, she was doing a social media thing every single time. And he just said he found it astonishing. I think there is some of that craziness going on in social media, where that is that person's life, right? And so, if you talk about that, you're talking about the alternative reality of someone's life, where your life is now given over to alternative reality, your own alternative reality. And, if that's going on, you've got to look at the war in Russia and say, Jeepers, how much of all of that? Bear in mind, there are real missiles going off, there's real suffering, all of that is real. How much of that is alternate reality, right? From both sides. And how much should we be paying attention to finding out that it's what the reality is? And for me, it's quite sad that I put up a couple of videos on that and nobody really wants to watch that. No one's really interested in the most important event taking place right now in our lifetimes. It was the pandemic, now it's that. It's potentially something that can take over our entire lives. Certainly, when you go and fill up your car, you buy groceries, it's already affecting your life. So then you want to pay attention to that. Some people don't. They simply don't want to pay attention to that. So if you think about what we're talking about, this whole thing with social media that seems quite harmless, it actually seems like fun. It seems like this picture postcard fairy tale, but the show's got to go on no matter what. And then the result of relentlessly pushing these fairy tales is that it eventually fulminates into a nightmare with everybody watching. In other words, these seemingly harmless manipulations, that's what it starts off with. It starts off with harmless manipulation. You omit something here, you minimize something there, or they have an actual cost. And so often in true crime, it actually costs women their lives in the situation. In Suzanne Morphew's case, I don't really see that so much. It's not like Suzanne Morphew was a social media maven, but I do think she was caught up in the fairy tale of her affair, right? And so in that case, I think it's quite different. But there are other cases like Gabby Petito and I think Shanann Watts, where you are saying something on social media, but you're omitting certain things. You're not saying certain things. You're minimizing certain things. You're manipulating certain things, I guess. And then this can actually cost you your life in that situation because you're in the habit of doing that. You're not in the habit of saying, this is exactly what's going on with me right now. And I think the simple antidote would have been just greater honesty and closer, more authentic connections to those closest to you. You must remember, from the point of view of the perpetrator, right? If you are Suzanne Morphew's killer, if you are Shanann Watts's killer, if you are Gabby Petito's killer, then it is harder to commit a crime and get away with it if all of those people are being honest and transparent regularly with people close to them, saying, this is exactly what's going on with me. And the reality, certainly in Shanann Watts's case, was that Chris Watts underestimated to what extent Shanann was sharing with her friends what was actually going on with her, including Nicole Atkinson, Christina Meacham, and others. I think the same thing applies with Suzanne Morphy as well. You might say they weren't honest enough. Well, Suzanne Morphy was actually communicating what was going on with herself with certain people. She was even making notes. And that is important. It's important to do that. So I'm just saying, from the perspective of someone who wants to commit a murder, if you are honest with the people around you, the people close to you, you're making it harder for someone like that to act and expect to get away with it, because you're kind of tracking what they're doing as they're doing it, right? So that thing of not reaching out, you might think, well, I'm not reaching out because it doesn't really suit me, but maybe you should reach out so that it doesn't suit somebody else. Think about it that way. Let me just look at some of your points here. Fake world on Facebook, says Mo Rama. Luna Star says, my girls 26 and 23 will only text, not talk on the phone. You should try and encourage them to talk on the phone like once a week or something. Dana says, greater honesty with those closest with you doesn't always work. Speaking from first-hand experience here. Dana, I've got to, I don't want to high-five you or anything like that, because it's quite sad, but I know exactly where you're coming from. So I don't know what you do in a situation like that. I guess you've got to find those closest to you that you can talk to, or try and deepen the relationships of some. It doesn't necessarily need to be family, it can be a friend. Or you want to keep a diary, or you want to do something. But I think you've got to, even if it's not like a case of a crime is about to happen and your life is on the line, just for your own sort of mental health and wellness, it does help to have someone that is kind of a safety net for you. By that, I'm not trying to say you must be codependent, you mustn't be strong, and you mustn't be independent. You must be all those things. But it does help to build some strong relationships. And that's something you can decide to do. You can say, you know what, I've got a lot of relationships online, but I would like to have some authentic relationships in the real world that I can rely on. Like you kind of got to ask yourself, can I rely on people in the real world? And if the answer is no, well, then you've got to find, try and build friendships and build relationships so that is the case. And I think kind of how it works is if you pay attention to someone else, but try and do it genuinely and sincerely, then it does tend to be reciprocated. If you have an interest in someone else's life and you pay attention to what matters to them, it probably will be reciprocated. Dana says you lose friends reaching out for help, and family too. That's quite sad, but I know where you're coming from. Dana says, I thought I had a ton of strong in-person, authentic, lifelong relationships, half-sided with him. Yeah. A thing like that can be devastating, but it can also be a really important reality check where you realize, well, these relationships aren't really real, or these friendships aren't actually what I thought they were. And so it's an opportunity to make new friendships. And you can. You definitely can. Terry says, if more people shared the real stuff, it could start a wave of compassion. Well said. Nisi says, without transparency, sometimes I get blown away by friends who out of nowhere speak about divorce. Like, what? I had no idea. Thanks a lot, Ali Cat. Yeah, so reaching out is kind of a tough one. You reach out sometimes, I think one of the most obvious things with reaching out is you realize a lot of people are very distracted. They're very busy with their own little sort of world. And you realize to what extent narcissism has sort of taken over in general. I don't mean that in an ugly way, just that people are just preoccupied with all the little things that are distracting them all the time. And you might want to break through that and just say, hey, you're important to me, am I important to you? And I need you right now, kind of thing, Mo Rama says, so many people cheat on their spouses with social media. Sad. Pauline says, Gabby was talking to Rose, but Gabby was unwilling to leave Brian, so there's a limit to how much a friend can help. Gabby would have been wise to have seen a professional. That's quite a tough one for a person that's like 22, 23. It's like, I'm going to go and seek professional help. It's sort of, I don't know how, I'm not quite sure what millennials are up to these days, but you can, I don't know, seeking professional help, I think for a young person isn't always like the first choice. Having a drink or smoking a whatever is maybe more of the average response to like, a situation you feel that's difficult. But I do think to the extent that we invest in social media, I wonder whether we don't lose the knack of patience, listening, understanding, kindness, and all that when someone reaches out. I've also got to acknowledge that another guy involved in true crime committed suicide, and I wish he'd reached out to me. And in a way, I think he was. We had some conversations, and I just sort of felt like he was always talking. It wasn't like a conversation. He was like constantly unloading. And I don't think I heard from him in about 3 or 4 or 5 months before he died. But I feel like, wow, I wished he'd reached out to me. And I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to say it. Can you say, listen here, I'm reaching out to you. I'm feeling, like literally define it as I'm reaching out. Are you responsive? Are you responsive to me reaching out, or are you going to sort of slap my hand away, kind of thing? Yeah, I mean, I find that really, really tragic, because I would have been happy to be there for him. And, I know he was trying to also start up a YouTube channel. I was sort of talking to him about it. So I feel quite bad about that. I feel bad that he didn't feel he could reach out to me, because I did feel like we were friends and we did communicate quite often. And that's to me a shame, because I think I don't know. I don't want to say I think I could have talked him out of it, but I think I could have helped him and I could have been there for him. And so that's the kind of the other side of the thing. Some people, if you reach out to them, will respond, will want to respond, kind of thing. Mo Rama says, maybe just ask, are you okay? Not there yet says, better to extend a hand and be rejected than to never be a friend at all. Yeah. Well, Pauline Buckle says, I saw a psychologist while I was in school. I was 23. Well, kudos to you. Not everyone has the maturity to say, you know what, I need to see a psychologist, here I go, you know. Okay, so as I say, the simple antidote to all of this artifice and, let's say, dishonesty and whatever is greater honesty and closer, more authentic connections. I'm not saying it's easy. It's the antidote, but it's not easy. It's not easy necessarily to be honest. Sometimes you're honest and the person doesn't really want to hear your honesty. It's like somebody asks you, how are you? And now you want to tell them, okay, how much time have you got? Because I want to tell you exactly how I am. I don't really want to hear that. I just want to hear that you're fine so that we can go on to the next thing. You know what I mean? So that's the other side to it. And so, you know, I think if you want deep relationships, you've got to look for people who are deeper people. If you want a deeper relationship with someone, you've got to look for deeper people. Neglecting to mention a few details, leaving out a few important facts that might not seem serious on social media, but just this idea of neglect, when compounded for long enough, can have lethal repercussions. You know, you talk about the neglect of animals, the neglect of a child, the neglect of a spouse. Just a simple thing like neglect, you just don't pay that much attention. Look at my neglecting to fasten a bottle, you know, loose bottle cage. Just a simple thing like that, just a bit of neglect. It can have lethal repercussions. It can have very, very serious repercussions. We used to neglect having small repercussions. We neglect to wash the dishes. We neglect to, you know, make sure our tires are pumped to the right pressure frequently. There's a bit of neglect here, a bit of neglect there. And it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but compounded, it can have lethal repercussions. And so the same applies to us in our relationships with other people and them with us. Don't neglect your relationships with other people. Think about just neglect, and I don't mean it in the loaded sense that it almost sounds, but think about the word neglect in the context of true crime. Are the family members in all of these high-profile cases we've looked at, the Suzanne Morphew case, the Shanann Watts case, the Rebecca Zahau case, the Oscar Pistorius case, is there an element where you had, whether you want to call it neglect or distraction, that allowed this something to take place, this horrible event to take place? And if the neglect wasn't there, but instead this very, very close connection to loved ones, would there have been a way for these horrible events to have taken place? And I think the answer is no. Neglect may not be the right word. It may just be you're distracted or you're not paying enough attention. But it's nevertheless that area where something is happening that you don't know about. Something is happening that you should be paying attention to, but you don't. Something is starting to happen, but you don't deal with it, right? You don't, you're not keeping track of it. And now from here we go to the next area. So we're talking about, did Gabby tell her parents about the Moab incident? Let's just have a look at the poll again. I see the poll is up to 60%. So 60% of you say no. And I'm going to I'm going to nail my colors to the mast, if that's the word. I don't think that Gabby did. I don't think Gabby did tell her folks. So I'm with the 60%. If you say, does it really matter? I think it does matter. I think it does matter if she did or didn't, because you want to sort of learn from that situation, right? It is possible that Gabby told them but minimized it. She may have said something like, the cop stopped us, Brian was speeding or something. So that is possible. But what I mean is, effectively, did Gabby say what happened? And I think the answer to that is no. That's just my opinion. So we've looked at Gabby not telling her folks. We've looked at whether Brian told his folks. And I think it's quite an interesting thing to speculate on if he did tell his folks. I don't know if he did, but if he did, that would be quite interesting, bearing in mind that he went home. And then we also looked at, what is the other one? Have Gabby's folks been completely clear about that aspect themselves? Have they sort of put up their hands and said, you know what, Gabby never told us about the Moab incident? It's a question. I don't know. I'm not 100% clear on what the answer is there. And now we go to the third area, which I think is kind of, it's kind of quite serious here. So it's one thing if Gabby didn't say anything. It's another thing if her parents haven't been that obvious or explicit about it. This area is kind of more questionable, and it's, did the Moab cops withhold the body cam footage? Did they redact footage? Right. In other words, it's the duty of law enforcement to actually communicate. There was this incident. This is exactly what happened. This is what we should have done. Blah 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 blah. Right. And I'm quoting now from the Independent newspaper. It's a British newspaper. It says, police from the Moab City Police Department have been accused of covering up body cam footage which showed a tearful Gabby Petito telling officers she had been assaulted by Brian Laundrie. Now, I think that's a little bit overstating things, because it's not like they withheld all of the body cam footage. They were like, no, this is a secret, we're not going to share with anyone. I think what they're trying to say is they did release the footage from Officer Daniel Robbins. I think that was released on the 16th of September. And so the covering up is really, well, they didn't release other body cam footage, right? And the fact is, the other body cam footage was kind of, how can I put it? It didn't put the Moab cops in such a great light. And you sort of wondered, did they know that? Is that why they released the footage that was sort of kind of more benign, right? And so this is kind of a situation where there was a serious investigation going on. The whole nation was paying attention. It's like, why are you not telling us what happened or showing us what happened? Or why are you not giving us all the information? So now you've got a situation where you can criticize Gabby for not talking to her parents. You can criticize her parents for not communicating with 100% clarity about a particular point. And now you've also got the police who, why are they not, the police are investigating a case. Why are other police not helping those police? Why is it not just, well, more than likely they did hand it over, but why is it not, why is there the sense of something being withheld? And so the article goes on to say, it was only after a former Grand County attorney accused them of withholding a second officer's body-worn footage that they released his footage 14 days later. So if I understand this correctly, I think it was at the end of September. So like the footage from Officer Robbins came out 16th of September. And then I think the next sort of the next set of video footage came out, I think 2 weeks later, so around about the end of September. But it wasn't like volunteered. It came about because of pressure from a Grand County attorney. And so this second release of footage was from Officer Pratt's body cam, and the article says it, quote, cast a different light on the altercation between the couple, because in this particular footage, Officer Pratt was told Gabby told him that she was actually struck in the face by Brian during the fight. This is according to the article. The article goes on to say, 2 officers responded that day, Pratt and Robbins. Where's Pratt's camera? Every news agency in the United States has requested it, and they have not been turned over. It became obvious to me watching the news that information had been withheld from the media. This is according to the article. Mr. Morgan, I think his name's Happy Morgan. Mr. Morgan wrote to Moab's acting chief of police, Mr. Palmer, again the next day, demanding an explanation for the delay in leaked emails obtained by KUTV. So, yeah, you kind of have the situation where even law enforcement are like, I don't know whether this is a really good look for us. We're not going to release it. Now, I think you could make the argument that it's one thing for them to probably pass on that to law enforcement. I'm sure they did that. It's another thing to give it to the public, right? I suppose you could make that argument. But in a weird way, it's an inverse of the whole thing of Gabby curating her social media, and now you've got law enforcement curating, seemingly curating what they're going to release and what they're not going to release, right? And so the article goes on to say that Mr. Morgan called the matter a cover-up, and then Mr. Palmer said that he planned to release the footage the next day, and it was made public on the 30th of September. And then it also goes on to say, right at the end, Moab police officer manager Kelly Day is under investigation for redacting police body cam footage. Now, I don't really know whether, because some of it was redacted, I don't really know whether the redacted footage is, some footage is legitimately redacted. For example, if someone's social security number is mentioned, or their address is mentioned, or their phone number is mentioned. If I remember correctly, there were other sections redacted that had to deal with what was being spoken about. And so so there was some fallout about this redacting of the police body cam footage. Mr. Morgan complained that parts of the body cam footage, according to the Independent, was removed to hide offensive comments made by the 2 officers. I don't really know what that means. Offensive comments about what? Offensive in what way? Offensive in terms of, I don't know. So I guess you can think about what that means. In any event, the officer responsible, office manager Kelly Day, was apparently placed on leave. So you've got all of this intrigue surrounding some of the police officers. Okay, Kitty, the cat scratching my chair. You've kind of got all of this intrigue surrounding the police officers who are also not being completely sort of transparent about what they've got. And so I'd sort of come to the question again. Remember what I said? Can you know, is it reasonable to expect total honesty? Just in a general sense. So this is true crime, and is it reasonable to expect total honesty? Should we expect total honesty from Nicole Kessinger? Should Nicole Kessinger hand over her phone and say, you know what, there are a lot of nude photos of myself. There's a lot of this and that. Just take it all and do your worst. Is that a reasonable expectation? And then you look at what has happened in this case. Was Gabby completely honest with her parents? Was Brian completely honest? And you go on and on through the whole thing. And I don't think it is reasonable to expect total honesty. And I think it's possibly a bit of hypocrisy from us where we say, you should be more honest, you should be more honest, you should be more honest. Are people absolutely honest about everything? Are you absolutely honest about everything? Do you reach out to someone when things aren't going great? And so if someone says to you, yeah, but you should be totally honest, it's the right thing to do. Well, are you? Right? And so all I'm saying is I think it's a bit unrealistic to expect total honesty. I think you can expect total honesty when someone's doing a polygraph. You can expect that, okay, if you want to pass the polygraph, be completely honest. But, beyond that, I'm not sure. Ernest Becker talks about character as a vital lie. And what he means by that is the whole caricature of who we are. So the whole apparatus that we construct from birth till, we're children, then we become teenagers, then we become young adults. We kind of invent a caricature around ourselves, a character, and we say, this is who I am. I am, and it's whatever you fill in that space. I'm this role, I'm this kind of person, I'm this, that, and the next thing. And it's what you don't realize. You may think it's just simply what it is, but what you don't realize is it's actually your projection. A really good way of thinking about it is like the Matrix, where I think Morpheus describes, I think he calls it residual self-image, is what appears in the Matrix is a digital recreation of yourself, the way you see yourself, right? In other words, so if you watch the Matrix, you see someone dressed in like a sort of a threadbare jumper, or and they pretty beat up, and they're not shaved very well, but when they appear in the Matrix, they are sort of invincible. They're dressed in leather and they look immaculate and they are strong and all these other things. They're strong and they're fast and they all these things. But character itself is actually a lie, right? That's what Ernest Becker says, is that our characters, it's kind of like a house of cards. It's something that we've kind of invented. And your character is only your character for as long as it's not your character. You will, let's say your character is that I'm an honest person. Well, that's your character until you're not honest, until you tell a lie. If your character is that you are successful or determined or loyal, well, that's your character until you aren't, right? So your character is maybe who you want to be, but it's also kind of based on a fiction. I don't know if I'm describing it very well, but the point is that in a weird way, we are all kind of fundamentally dishonest. And if you think that is an extreme statement to make, I think in a weird way, the fall that I experienced when I fell off my bike and cracked a rib, I kind of felt this strange, uncomfortable sensation of, well, you're not immortal, and also you're not perfect, but you can also make stupid mistakes. And so what I'm trying to say through that is my vital lie, or my sort of character thing, was this thing of you do things right, you strong, and you or whatever it is, until something completely breaks through that. And one of the things I think we do assume is that we're gonna, because we live day after day after day without incident, there's the sense that that's going to continue, that we're not going to get sick, we're not going to die, that we are kind of invincible, that we are kind of perfect beings, and we're actually far from it. We're very flawed. And in that sense, we sort of lie to each other and to ourselves. And I think we have to, because I don't really want to say this because it's quite depressing, but during the cycle tour that I was on, we had quite a few conversations over breakfast over other riders that had just suddenly had really bad things happen to them. One rider literally dropped dead on his bicycle, I think of a heart attack. Somebody else died in a major cycling race, I think also of a heart attack. And we spoke about quite a few of these incidents, and I actually said it's like flicking a switch, almost like in the Matrix as well, where 1 minute you can be alive and the next you're not alive and you've got no control over it. And in our group, talking about this was a doctor, and the doctor said, when your time's up, your time's up. And the doctor was like very familiar with this idea that it's almost like, for reasons unknown, one moment you can be alive and the next you're not. And I said, wow, that is actually terrifying. I mean, we are going out now in the pursuit of life, certainly going out on these mountain bikes. We're going out to be alive and to enjoy it, and you could die. And then, of course, I fell the way that I fell. What I'm trying to say is, you have this impression that life is guaranteed and that your fairy tale is guaranteed, even if it's not a very big fairy tale. My fairy tale was just to have this nice 3-day weekend away, and I was about to enter, with the palm leaves. I was about to have my fairy tale ending when it came to a harsh end. Thanks a lot, Faticus. Faticus says, need to do more of your commentary on Ukraine. I'm really a little bit confused about what I need to be doing on YouTube, just because often when I talk about what I want to talk about, I seem to lose subscribers by the dozen. So if I talk about the war in Ukraine, no, we don't want to hear about that. Minus 5 or 10 subscribers. If I talk about Van Gogh, minus 5 or 10 subscribers. If I talk about Alec Baldwin, I got a lot of traction on Alec Baldwin until a certain point. And then I think some people decided, are you on Alec Baldwin's side or are you not on his side? And those who decided, I don't know, whatever they decided. And so, I don't know if you guys have noticed, I've definitely, my subscription numbers have just stalled, like, and so what's happening is I'm growing subscribers, but I'm also losing a lot of subscribers. And I think the reason is my content has strayed into sort of an area that people feel is political. So, if you think that, then it means that's what you think politically. And if you say that, and I find that quite unfortunate, because it's now not about what is reality. It's like, what is your political view? What are your beliefs about something? And that's just kind of where it is. So I would actually like to keep the conversation on true crime, but I also feel like we should bring it back to the real world as well. Like, what do we make of the war? What do we make of the pandemic? But as soon as you have those conversations, it's like, oh, I can see you are this or that, unsubscribe. And so how do you interrogate questions of reality when that's how somebody regards you, So it's, anyway, quite a interesting dilemma. Connie says, perhaps make a second channel for non-true crime interests. I don't know. My kind of response to it is, there's a point where I want to work harder. So there's a point where, because of that, I sort of want to work harder. And then there's another point where it just makes me want to almost be private and just be like, okay, I'm not gonna put up that much content anymore, or I'm going to make it very narrow. Let's just talk about the John Ramsey case. Let's just talk about the Barry Morphew case. But I've also got to decide how important are subscribers to me, and how important is having an influence, having a authentic influence on the world. Obviously not the whole world, but on the world that I affect. And to me, that is quite important. So I'm definitely not in the right place to make those decisions right now, because I'm quite compromised. So I don't know. Stephanie says, I don't know why people unsubscribe, just don't watch that episode or video. Yeah. Okay. Fatika says, sorry, didn't mean to sidetrack you. I did get sidetracked there a little bit. Okay, so if we're tabulating the players in the situation, we seem to have Gabby and Brian not being completely honest, the parents and the talk show hosts not really talking about the not very flattering issue that Gabby didn't seem to take them into their confidence about the incident, and law enforcement being less than forthcoming as well. And then the final point is the point that we all know about. The laundry silence compounded everything. So on top of all of this, you actually have the laundries almost waving a flag at the whole world, the flag being, we have the right to remain silent. And I realize it's a fairly cynical position to take, but doesn't it seem as if everyone in the story was less than completely honest? Personally, I don't blame Gabby's family for not knowing about the Moab incident, but I do find it interesting that part, her electing to not tell them, is relevant. Nicole does seem to own this when she says, I wish that she reached out to me. My heart really goes out to that sentiment, because you can imagine if Gabby did reach out to her mother could have helped her. Her mother could have rescued her. And the tragedy here is that Gabby seemed not to want to be rescued, and that propelled her into disaster, right? And I think many of us wish that too, because that alone could have changed the outcome completely. It could have saved not just one life, but two. And what I mean by many of us wish that too, many of us wish Gabby had asked to be rescued, that Gabby had said, look, I can't do this. Can somebody rescue me? But I do want to ask you to apply the same psychology to your life, to those close to you. I did bring this up earlier. Do you reach out to them when you really should? And I know that I don't. So I'm not sort of wagging my finger at you guys. I'm kind of, when I wrote this, I was thinking about, well, I really need to own this part myself. I don't reach out when I really should. And what does that mean? Does it mean we're a shallower society? Does it mean we prideful or boastful? Are we a shallower society in general? Does it mean we are a more disconnected society in general, a more distracted society, a society where our relationships matter less for how they are than how they appear? Or have we become, as a community, simply less transparent about who we are because of social media and the narcissism that goes with that? In a very crude way, what happened here with Hi Muffin Top, in a very crude way, what happened here feels like a whole dynamic of people who weren't completely truthful with one another. Putting it more bluntly, aren't we a society that lies to ourselves? In other words, aren't we a society that everyone is just lying to one another? Everyone, right? Some people a lot more than others. Some people in a way that's obviously criminal. But think about all the people who say, I'm not going to pay attention to that news network, they're just telling lies. Think about our perception of the Russians, that they are totally misled about the war. Think about what we've been led to believe about climate change and the pandemic and so on. It feels like there's a heck of a lot of people lying to each other. And if you think about it almost like an outsider, like you're an alien looking at Earth, or a horse that's like got super intelligence looking at people, or my dog looking at people and going, why don't you guys just tell each other what's going on? Because you're creating this big mess by not doing that. Why don't you guys just sort of work together, right? As I say, we have entire news channels that one group believes is fake. So that's all lies, right? And so we seem to innately believe that we are all to some extent liars, lying to ourselves and to each other. Is it any wonder then if we build our everyday dreams and fairy tales on a fabric of lies that they inevitably fall apart? Let me read that again. We seem to innately believe that we are all, to some extent, liars, lying to ourselves and to each other. Is it any wonder then if we build our everyday dreams and fairy tales on a fabric of lies that they inevitably fall apart? If you don't know what that means, think about Gabby and Brian going on this summer epic, which is a fairy tale, and they want to have this incredible journey, but they want to build that journey on sort of this fairy tale of social media. Look at this great time we're having at Moab. Look at this wonderful experience we're having at this national park and that one. But it's, and you might say they're not lying, they're just telling a part of the truth. But what I'm trying to get at is it's not completely authentic. So you're building your dream. So you want to build your job, you want to build your career, you want to build even your relationship, because they were together on this summer epic. You want to build your daily dreams and fairy tales on a fabric of something that's not really true. Well, isn't it any wonder that it's going to fall apart? If you can't be honest about kind of what it is you're doing or want, then how are you going to deal with reality? If you can't be honest about reality, reality is going to deal with you. Reality is going to show you what the real situation is. You can spend all your time in an alternate reality, but reality is going to drag you kicking and screaming back to reality. Tanya says, I've got to go back to learn. What did Tanya say earlier there? I have to go back to see. Wow, this doesn't surprise me. Okay, so by the way, it seems like it stayed fairly consistent. The question, did Gabby's folks know about the Moab incident? 59% of you have said no. It's quite interesting that more of you say it doesn't matter. 22% say it doesn't matter compared to 18% saying yes, Gabby did tell them. So that's where we are now. Only about 500 of you voted, but it's still, I think, a fairly comprehensive sort of poll. Gathering place, you've been a member for 2 months. Thanks for your, loyalty? Thanks for being here. Gathering place says, getting honest can be emotionally so painful. I've got to say that two things are really very difficult when you're not used to it. The one is being honest, like with yourself, like a relationship's not working, your job is not working, your fitness attempts are failing, your attempts to lose weight or whatever are failing, your attempts to get somebody's attention or someone you find attractive isn't working. Being honest with yourself in those respects can definitely be painful. But it's more painful is perpetuating all of that. So going into that even further, committing more time, more energy before reality really hits you over the head like a frying pan and says, it's not happening. So it is painful, but it can be more painful if you don't accept it. Another thing that is painful, I don't know if pain is the right word, is thinking. Thinking for yourself can be quite painful. But just ordinary, we are quite lazy thinkers, human beings. You might not think so. We like to be told what to think. We like to be sort of just take the path of least resistance. Thinking for yourself can actually be really, really painful and difficult. Asking a question and getting the answer in a way that you say, okay, I think that this is the truth. I don't mean when you rely on somebody else. I mean when you say, I'm going to ask this question and I'm going to get the answer. That is quite difficult, and can be quite painful as well. Can be quite painful trying to find the truth about something. But the good news is when it's almost like a muscle. If you're not honest on it, if you're not honest often, the muscles surrounding that, your ability to respond to the world become weak. Your ability to be an effective human being, your ability to be an effective organism struggles, right? So that's in terms of honesty. In terms of dealing with the truth, the more you ask questions and get answers, the more effective you also become as a person. And the stronger you become as a person because you get better at dealing with, whether you want to call it bad news or things that don't suit you. And so, on the one hand, all of that stuff's painful and uncomfortable and difficult. But on the other hand, you become a stronger human being as a result of practicing dealing with all of that stuff. You become more resilient, and that's what this world definitely does need, more resilience. And that's really my piece. Thanks a lot, Kelly. You said that just in time. Corporal Deb says, the video where Gabby was talking to the female cop and was asked if she could show her the international DA sign, the police withheld that. Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that. Yeah, that footage we don't have. So, I suppose you could make the argument that not everything has still been released, but I don't know if that falls into the purview of law enforcement. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to say about that. The other thing is you could argue that we haven't gotten access to Brian's notebook. I don't know if the public has a right to absolutely everything. We have, certain things are in the public interest, and the Barry Morphew case is quite an interesting case when you see how much is disclosed, but also how much isn't disclosed. And there are sometimes good reasons why certain things aren't disclosed. Certain things aren't in the public interest. You might say, sorry, I want to know that that's in my interest, but the powers that be may say it's not directly relevant. So bear in mind you had two officers trying to find out what was going on. The park ranger may have played a different role, as a compassionate bystander, and it might have been totally different. Even in the phone data review of the Chris Watts case, somebody decided these messages are relevant and these aren't relevant. And you might say, oh, no, that's a conspiracy, you're withholding information from me. it's someone's call to decide what is relevant to an investigation and what isn't. Simple as that. If you want to see that as a conspiracy, you can. But I think it just kind of makes sense. Ellie Cat says, I wish I could have had a father like you. I don't think you would have. Okay, that definitely is a little bit funny. You're definitely not old enough to be my father, but it would have made a difference. My friend Alex, who died, definitely felt like a father figure, just someone who always seemed very wise, always seemed very informed, always seemed very balanced, always seemed very fair, always seemed very moral, always seemed to know what to do, always seemed to have such awesome intelligence about stuff. And that's something I really miss. I miss that. But I think another part of me says, look, there's nothing I can do about it. But another part of me says, you're 50 years old. Maybe it's time that you grow up. Maybe it's time that you learn to make your own decisions. You don't need to, I won't say you don't need to, but at some point you've got to take responsibility for the way you view things and the way you respond to things and what you do about things. At some point, your parents aren't going to be around. At some point, it is up to you. At some point, I think you do have to grow up. And I think you can see around you all the time people who do grow up and who do take responsibility and who do lead effective lives, and you see people who just can't get it together. It's always someone else's fault, or they just never are able to get it together. And isn't that because they are always almost like in the child role? They're waiting for someone to save them or someone to rescue them or someone to tell them what to do. And, if you certainly beyond your 40s, at some point you've got to say, I'm going to be an adult. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to stop making the same mistakes, and I'm going to start being an adult. I mean, at what point do you have to sort of rely on someone else, almost like a crutch? Or, you know what I mean? At some point, you do have to stand alone, as hard as that is. Stephanie says, this is so deep. It is pretty deep. I didn't mean for this to be such a deep show. Blamers need someone to think for them. So the temptation whenever you blame someone, whenever you're the victim, is that it's never up to you to solve your problem. So on the one hand, you get the benefit that you've scapegoated somebody, right? The problem is that you never ever escape a situation because you will never gain power over it. So on the one hand, blaming someone gives you the relief that it's always somebody else's fault. Something is always a big conspiracy. It's always someone else has got the power. It's always someone betrayed you or let you down or whatever. And so that absolves you of responsibility over your own situation. And so you are doomed to stay in your situation. As soon as you take that painful step and say, I'm going to be honest about what's going on, I'm going to kind of take control. I'm going to be the adult here. I'm going to be realistic, then you are starting to take power back in terms of your own life. And I would say I'm exhibit A in terms of that. There were aspects in my past where I felt feelings of blame and resentment and entitlement and all those things. And when I let all of that go and I said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. In other words, instead of it's your fault, I wish this, couldn't you do that, couldn't you do that? What about this, what about that, what about this person, what about that person? If you take all of that and you just throw it away and you replace that with, I am going to do this, I am going to do that, I am this, I am that. You're totally changing your reality. You're making your reality. You're taking control of your story. You're taking control of your life. It's now up to you, and then it becomes up to you. And that's actually wonderful. It's very liberating. It's very nice to be in a situation where you call the shots in your own life, and it's not everything that happens isn't someone else's fault, it's your fault. And so why not make the things that are your fault work for you? So if you're successful, it's your fault, it's not somebody else's fault. If you have a good experience, it's your fault, not somebody else's fault. If you have good relationships, it's your fault, not somebody else's fault. So think about fault and blame in a positive sense where you take responsibility for it. Fatika says, this is what I'm talking about. You got a great discussion going on. It's about doing the next right thing without resentment and self-pity. It's hard, but it's true. I read an excellent comment about self-pity from Lewis Pugh. I once interviewed him for GQ magazine. And it was really a great moment for me because I really admired him. And it was a great moment to sort of have the excuse to interview this guy who I admired for a publication I also admired. And this, if you've never heard of Lewis Pugh, you can Google him. It's, maybe I should just put a link up here so you can check it out. He has written a book. He's actually written, I think, a couple of books. But he's kind of a cold water swimmer. He's also a lawyer. I think he's an ex-maritime lawyer. I'm not sure if he's still a lawyer, but he's a really inspiring fellow. But what he said about self-pity just was so powerful. He's talking about doing almost the unthinkable. It's where he's sort of perched on the edge of a boat or a ship at the Arctic, and he's about to jump in the ice cold water of the Arctic and swim whatever is designated is his goal, 2 minutes, 200 meters, whatever it is. And just to give you an idea, the water is so cold that after he would swim, his fingers would swell up like sausages. And, he would basically plunge himself into an emergency. But basically what he said is, in order to take this unthinkable step of actually volunteering to jump into this ice cold water, you're not just jumping into the water, you're going to stay in this water for a certain amount of time. He had to psych himself up. And he used music to psych himself up, and he used other affirmations to psych himself up. He also built a lot of muscle in his chest area and so on, because muscle is a better shield against the cold than fat. You might not think so. But this is the part that really stood out, is he said, self-pity will kill you. So in other words, if you go timidly towards that frozen water, and you start feeling sorry for yourself, and you start feeling like, whatever, I don't want to do this, feelings of doubt, feelings of insecurity, you allow that shadow just to overcome you. He says that can actually be life-threatening, that self-pity can actually destroy you in that situation. And so what is the opposite of that, of self-pity in that situation, is you've got to have like a fire inside yourself, a fire of belief, a fire of confidence. And so that the moment you dive into that water, you are so fired up that you kind of don't feel it, right? The opposite to all of that is the fear that overwhelms you from self-pity. And no one is saying that your self-pity isn't realistic. No one is saying that your self-pity isn't grounded in reality. No one is saying that your self-pity isn't reasonable or rational. But if what you want to do is have the successful moment, if what you want to do is have this effective, um, uh, what's the word, transcendent experience, then you are going to need to fire yourself up, and not with fakeness, and you've got to build yourself up in an authentic way. I'm prepared for this. I can do it. I'm strong. I'm all of these things, and then with that spirit, you jump into the water, and then you can resist it. And to me, what is so amazing about this, I think he even said that using certain programming, certain thinking, certain affirmations, he could actually raise his internal body temperature. He could actually raise his core temperature by thinking things in a certain way. So I just find that really powerful, But in a general sense, if you take it away from this incredible swimmer swimming in the Arctic, and you think about self-pity as something that is actually your enemy, it is. It really is. And so it's something you must try and defend yourself against. If you feel yourself becoming self-pitiful, identify it, recognize it, and then try and find a way to sort of immunize against it. Find, without being artificial, so don't try and find some affirmation on Facebook or some sort of empty quote somewhere. Try and find your way in your own heart to something that is real about yourself, that counters your sense of self-pity. So where you say, I've been through this before and I've beaten it, or I know I'm stronger than this, or if I've never done this before, or if I've never dealt with this before, I'm going to deal with it now, or whatever it is. And I don't know, find something in your backstory or in your essence that is true, and build on that. And a really interesting story that is similar to this comes from, trying to think of his name now. Who is the kid who a rock fell on his arm and trapped his arm? Do you guys remember that story? Aaron something. I think his surname starts with an R. Do you guys know that? There was a movie called 127 Hours. Do you guys know about that? Ralston, that's it. Terry Dean, thanks a lot for that. Yes, mindset can change everything. A change of mind can be a change of reality. So what Aaron did was, so he was in a situation where he'd hiked by himself, and a boulder sort of fell through kind of a channel, a sort of a parallel wall of rock, and it sort of fell onto his arm. Yeah, no, it's a very difficult movie to watch. And the part, I think you know the part that I'm talking about, the part where he cuts through the nerve is particularly impossible to watch. But the thing that gave him so there's a absolute scenario where you can feel sorry for yourself. I'm now trapped, my arm's crushed, I'm just going to wait here and die. And so this was literally a situation of either you find something that overcomes your self-pity, or you die. And you might say, I need to dislodge my body from my arm. Sorry, I've got a bit of a blocked nose. I've got to dislodge my body from my arm. Okay, well, I don't want to do that. Well, then you're going to die. Okay, well, what I've got to do is dislodge my body from my arm, but it's going to be too painful. Well, then you're going to die, right? And so you're caught in this bind. right? And so the incredible thing with his stories that he said, I'm not sure if he hallucinated this or if he visualized it or a combination of both, but he actually imagined his own son, his own unborn son, sort of gesturing towards him, almost like come here or hi dad or whatever. But the reality was he didn't actually have a son, right? And so he had this amazing kind of epiphany where he said, in order for my son to live, in order for what I've just seen to happen, I need to do this. And so that's how he did it. So in other words, in a weird way, he conjured a fiction, but he did something that made that fiction self-fulfilling. And so you can even use a fiction. I don't really like this idea because of the way society is fictionalized, but you can use a affirmative fiction to draw you out of a horrible reality that can take you to a better place. And that is literally what he did. But what I'm trying to get at is he overcame his self-pity, found a way to overcome self-pity. And I find in true crime there's a lot of a sense of someone is a victim, but you want that person to be even more of a victim than they really are. Someone is a perpetrator, but they've got to be more evil and more powerful and more horrible than they really are. And that to me is not what true crime is about. True crime is about asking, what is reality? What is the reality of this story? What is the reality of these people? And then you've got to bring that reality back to yourself and say, what is my reality? Who am I? What would I do in this situation? And in the same way, am I going to be a victim? Am I going to overcome the situation, the difficult relationship, the dangerous place I'm in, or not? Am I going to allow self-pity and this idea that I'm a victim? Who are you? I am a victim. I'm a victim of my circumstances. I'm a victim of life. I'm a victim, blah, 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 blah. All of that is self-pitying talk. And as long as you say that, you are giving away power over your own life. As soon as you say, I am going to do X, Y, Z, cut off my arm, I'm going to whatever, then you are taking back power of your life. And that's the beginning of, that's the end of self-pity and the beginning of you taking power over. And it takes practice. I mean, you may not take back much in the beginning, and it may be tempting to go back to old ways, but you can certainly practice, and it gets easier dealing with pain. I've got a cracked rib right now, totally cracked, and I can tell you right now I don't even feel it at all. Not because I'm superhuman and not because I'm on pain pills, just because the body can heal. The body can you can improve. So have some faith in that. We can also evolve. One thing I never appreciated or imagined when I was writing books was how I would change as a person. So I'd write one book, another book, another book, another book, and sort of had a formula, so we're going to deal with identity, we're going to deal with the timeline, we're going to deal with certain contextual evidence, we're going to deal with premeditation and post-meditation. One of the things I didn't anticipate was how my thinking would become effective book after book after book. And so that just shows you, as you become more self-generating, you become a better self. The more that you do based on your own creativity, your own initiative, the more you kind of evolve and the more powerful you become as an individual. the more you blame and the more you feel sorry for yourself and the more you run away from reality, the more you lose control, lose power, lose efficacy over your own life. So, as Stephanie says, this is an incredibly deep live. Really didn't mean for it to be, but there you go. Faticus says, because you got something to say. That's right. Faticus, you actually set me off on this. So there we go. So yeah, so the whole point of this discussion was to talk about honesty and to talk about the fact that it's expecting a lot from people to be honest in these, to be completely honest and in these situations. And I want to challenge you to be more honest in terms of yourself. You don't have to, I'm not necessarily saying, just be 100% honest with everybody you talk to now. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'm challenging you to be more honest with yourself. In the movie Interstellar, there's this quite funny, ironic moment where the robot says to Cooper, the robot says, 100% honesty is not recommended with emotional beings, and that is a fact. That is definitely a fact. So anyway, I'm just challenging you guys to be more honest with yourself, to start at that point. And if you're not sure, as I said, what that means, just think about what happened with Gabby Petito and this thing of, well, I'm not going to say exactly what happened at the Moab incident and all the people involved in that story. If you wanted to undo the tragedy of Gabby Petito, all that it required was a little bit more honesty. Sounds simple, it's not easy, but that is what would have helped everything. And that's generally the same recipe that applies in all of true crime. If someone was more authentic, if they weren't used to hiding things away, they weren't living a double life, blah, 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 then all of it wouldn't have been necessary. Sageri Norna says, thanks TCRS, excellent live. Thanks a lot for that. Corporal Deb says, a liar needs a great memory and even still one wrong word and down it goes. I always say all murderers are liars, but not all liars are murderers. So, being honest with yourself, you might say it's quite harsh telling me I'm a liar, but you can always be more honest with yourself. You can ask, is this working? Is there a better way of doing this? Is there a better way of dealing with this? Am I using my time in the best way, or could I be using my time better? Are my thoughts edifying me or not? Are my daily habits something that I need to alter? Can I improve on them? All those kinds of things. Gigi Jardine says, I've been praying for a quick recovery. Oh, you mean for me? I'm not sure. Are you needing to recover from something? P. Willie says, life is hard. Hard can be good. The sooner you come to terms with that and take responsibility to be true to yourself. Mindfulness and purpose versus a life of reacting. Yeah, that's a good point. You don't need to react to life. You can respond to it. You can choose how you respond. And was it M. Scott Peck who said, life is hard, and once you accept that, it actually becomes easier. So, you can go through your whole life saying, well, life is really hard. Well, I'm quite surprised life's really hard. Once you sort of accept that, well, then it gets easier because you get busy getting to work with life. So, I can also, the longer I kind of kick against the fact that I'm injured, the worse it gets. The sooner I say, you're injured, we know it, it's a crap situation, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with, not what can't you do, what can you do? The sooner you're going to get where, to a better place, right? So hope that's something I'm going to be able to sustain myself. Dana says, boundaries, honesty is great, but you also don't have to tell everyone everything, nor do you have a responsibility to answer their questions. That's also true. No one is saying be 100% honest, or that you owe someone the absolute truth. I'm simply saying be more honest with yourself, that's all. Okay, so we're approaching the 3-hour mark. I don't really want to go beyond that. Thanks everyone for being part of this live. I am hoping to do another Van Gogh episode on Monday, tomorrow. I'm not sure if that's going to be with Stephanie or not. I do know I'm going to be doing another episode with Stephanie, but we'll see how our schedules work. The subject of the next Van Gogh episode is his funeral. And to be honest, I kind of didn't really want to talk about that for a while. It was just like, I just didn't really want to talk about that, but I think I'm ready to talk about it now. Not now, I was for a couple of days, but certainly when it was time to talk about it, I was like, I feel a bit like I need a bit of time in my cave before I can talk about this. I'm not quite sure what to make of Holly's statement. Do you have any Van Gogh original pictures? Are you asking me, do I have any original paintings by Van Gogh? No, I absolutely don't. I've got prints by him, but certainly not. If I did, I don't know if I would be on YouTube. I would, because they're worth tens of millions of dollars, if not more. Stephanie says, tomorrow I'm working and then my son has karate. So, Stephanie, I'm going to be on my own with the funeral. Okay. The next chapter is actually pretty complex. So I don't know if you want to help me out with that one. Snow Lion says, yay, more Van Gogh. My uncle just died. It's been very hard for me. Sorry to hear that, Snow Lion. Sorry to hear about your uncle. I must say, I don't know when I said this, but I was saying just that there's been so much death. There's just been so much death, and it just seems to be getting worse. Like you had the pandemic, and then certain things happened to me, talking about people that I know, and now there's the war in Ukraine. But it just feels like there's been so much death, doesn't it? Pauline asks, is Timmy still here? I think he's lying on my bed. He was lying on my lap and I sort of let him fall through my lap a little bit earlier. Faticus, one thing I did want to say about the war in Ukraine is that, and you might think it's quite an objectionable thing to say, but it might lead to a lot of good in the world. It might lead to appreciation of democracy, but in a tangible sense. It might lead to fast-tracking investment in electric vehicles and renewable energy. In other words, speeding that process up greatly. That also needs to happen. It might lead to some really good developments. On the other hand, it could actually lead to some planet-changing catastrophes. So, we'll see what happens. Sharon Tuck says, Ukraine news tonight is so heartbreaking. Yeah. Zircon says, I'm optimistic too, Nick. Well, that's good to hear. Holly Marie says, that's what I meant. I don't know much about his artwork, just his story. I've got two of his, no, I've got how many? 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 4 of his artworks in my bedroom, 2 very big ones and 2 small ones, and I've got one in this room. Starry, Starry Night, it's on that wall over there. And then I've also got a portrait, self-portrait that he did also over there. When I walk into this room, I see a self-portrait of Van Gogh. Nisi says, thank you, can't wait for Van Gogh. That's always good to hear. Tanya Stokely says, people should say there are females like this too. Holly Marie says, please show us some of your prints again by him. I suppose I could. I don't really have that many left to show. Starry Night's basically it. Otherwise, I've showed all of them. Okay, so we passed the 3-hour mark. I'm really surprised my voice has survived this. I'm going to try and narrate a little bit of an audio book after this. But yeah, I'm quite glad I did this live. I was going to do a episode that was edited, and I just didn't quite, just couldn't see myself doing that. So this turned out to be quite an interesting live, I think. Thanks to you guys for voting. I see we still at 59% for no. Gabby wanted the trip to go on. She didn't tell her folks. Thanks to the mods that are here. Jean Karras from Boulder, Colorado, Stephanie from Connecticut, Sharon Tuck from Canada. I don't know if Bria's in the house. Bria's in France, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning in France, or probably not. Thanks also to the members and also to the new members who've signed up. By the way, the Van Gogh will be a members only. So to those who aren't members, sorry about that. To those who are, I'm sure you've been waiting for that. Alicat says, do you think there's truth in the journalism going on in Ukraine? Well, I think it depends who you're talking about. I think there's a lot of truth, but it depends on which networks you're paying attention to, and also whether you're listening to it in Russia or here. I think there's also quite a lot of, if you want the truth in terms of Ukraine, try and find the video that's been shot there. In other words, try and find not the social media, but try and find the on-the-ground video that's shot by people that are actually there. That's going to give you the best idea. Patricia Burns says, Snow Lions is very interesting and enjoyable live. I voted no. She didn't tell her parents. Looking forward to Van Gogh. Can we watch if we are not channel members? Yes, you can. You can watch, you just can't comment. Lynn Lippy says, this is a great live and very glad it went deep and introspective. Thanks for that. P. Willie says, thanks so much for your deep, thoughtful discussion. Zenaida Rivera says, thanks, Nick. I saw quite a long comment from someone. Patricia Burns says, it's actually shocking that she didn't reach out to her mum when she was alone for nearly a week straight after the Moab incident. I don't think it's quite like that. I don't think she didn't reach out to her mum at all. I don't think she didn't communicate with her mum at all. I think she did. She just was selective in what she told her mother, that's all. So some of you have asked, where's Timmy? Is right here. I think he's kind of saying that's enough now. Timmy, can I lift you up? I think Timmy's decided, I think you've been blabbering enough, and the ASMR only worked to a point, and then I woke up. So Timmy's going to say goodbye. Timmy actually needs another shave, but it's sort of getting quite cold here, so maybe I won't shave him. He does tend to, it's a little bit awkward saying this, but he does tend to get a bit messy at his rear end if you don't shave in there, so maybe you'll have to get a shave anyway. Hey, getting a bit dirty. I don't know, do you guys have dogs, and do they insist on looking out the car window when you drive somewhere? Because he does. And he's got the habit now, sometimes he doesn't do it on purpose, but sometimes he presses the window, it's electric. Sometimes he presses the electric button with his head out the window. And it happened once where he actually kind of jammed his head into it's not actually funny. And obviously the moment he did it, I pulled it back down, but it's definitely not a nice moment when that happens. But it has happened once so far, so I hope it doesn't happen again. Hey, Tommy? Okay, thanks everyone for joining in chat. Look out for the Van Gogh probably tomorrow. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Hey, take care.